Today we have a special guest, David Piatek. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Who do you work for? Why are you here? Take it away.
Thank you, Clay, for having me again. David Piatek. I'm a director of government lending at Waterman Bank, and I also have a YouTube channel called VA Housing Education. So if you guys want to get the most up-to-date information on the VA home loan and real estate market, check it out because there's a lot of misinformation that's out there for veterans to really understand. And Clay, glad to be back. Since the last time I was here, we had a hot chicken wing eating contest, which went great, but it hurt a lot.
It did hurt. And talking about misinformation and misconceptions, I want to talk about the top 5 misconceptions for the VA home loan, starting basic.
Yep.
A lot of veterans believe you can only use your VA home loan once. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, so there's and I'll also preface it with this, is that a lot of veterans disqualify themselves from using the VA home loan because of the myths that exist. And about 30 to 40% of people that are actually qualified end up never going through the process because of either like the private news network or their battle buddies, or they look at stuff online. So that's kind of one of the common ones we get when we do presentations, is that you can only use the program one time. And that's because the VA has evolved over time. And back in the day, you had a time limit on there. They removed all that stuff. So it's a life benefit. It doesn't make a difference if you're 18 years old, 6 months in the military, private, or you're 99 years old. You can use the VA home loan at any time, because another misconception with that is that people will say, well, I'm too old to use the VA loan. I won't be able to repay it in that 30 years. That's not the concern, right? They can't discriminate against age. So you can use the program at any time. And especially like when we do presentations for some organizations, they have a lot of older veterans that just don't realize that they can use it at any point, because for whatever reason, people never used it.
Okay, another misconception, true or false, I can or I cannot have multiple VA home loans. Is that at one time? Is it I close this VA home loan, now I can use a new one? I mean, what does that even look like?
So that's another good one. So the way the program works is that you can technically have unlimited VA home loans. The challenge that comes up is that at some point you're going to exhaust your entitlement. So I'll kind of break that down because this is a little bit complicated, but you guys will get this. So when you don't have an outstanding VA home loan, there is no limit on what you can qualify or what you're eligible for, as long as you're qualified. So meaning that I don't have a VA loan right now. I want to buy $1.5 million property. You can do so with no money down, again, providing that you have the eligibility and qualification.
When you say qualification, meaning you can afford.
Right. You can. Yeah. It's the credit collateral capacity, right? Do you have the credit to do it? Do you have the ability to make the payments, right? And then do you have enough money to be able to sustain that? So a couple of things that go into that piece, right? And again, that's also a big part of the finances that veterans disqualify themselves on, because they're like, well, I was told this and I can't do that. Or like, you can't use, people will be like, I only have disability income, I can't buy a house. Well, yes, you can. You can use all of your disability to qualify. Not only that, a lender can gross up that income by 125%, giving you more purchasing power. So any tax-free income gets grossed up. So when it comes to the actual multiple loans themselves, this is where it gets a little complicated. So it's based on the single family Fannie Mae loan limit for the area. So I'll break that down. Generally, across the country as of today, it's $766,550. Okay, so that's the max when you have multiple VA loans. So the VA has 2 sets of rules, right? No VA loan, no, sky's the limit as long as you can do it. When you have a VA loan and you're using the VA loan again, then it goes back to having caps. Okay, and so in this example, let's say you're in Chicago, limit $766,550. If you buy a place for $266,550, you still have $500,000 left to use to buy another property with no money down, by the way. Now, anything over that $500,000 requires a 25% down payment for the difference. So if you wanted to buy a $600,000 property in this example, you have a $100,000 spread, you do $25,000 down payment.
Now, is that for when a veteran has a existing
only
mortgage,
when they have an existing,
and once that mortgage is closed and that VA home loan is back to being new, they can still have the no cap, correct?
Yeah, and this is another good. So I'm glad you brought that up. So when it comes to being pre-approved, when you currently have a property that you're going to be selling, right? A lender can qualify you as if you have your full entitlement because it'll be contingent on you selling your property. Now you can sell and buy the same day. You just have to sell in the morning, provide all documents to the lender. Lender updates it with the VA, and then you can close in the afternoon.
Yeah, that takes some planning for sure. I would definitely assume.
Yeah.
Going on to another misconception is, I really like to talk about veterans using their disability compensation to pay off debt, be debt free, and essentially live, their version of the American dream.
Definitely.
The VA home loan is definitely an added benefit to that when it comes to renting out your home. And so my question is, when can you even rent your home rent your real estate using a VA home loan? So no money down. What does that look like?
All right. So there's a couple things to that. So one, a current VA loan can be turned into an investment property. You don't have to refinance out of that property in order to, use the VA loan again. As long as you have enough entitlement, you're good to go. Because that's also the consideration people will have is like when they look at this multiple loan situation, they might be better off selling that property just because they don't have enough entitlement to be able to do that. But there is no minimum requirement that you have to live in that property because a lot of people will say, oh, it's a minimum of 1 year. That's an FHA thing. Like that's not a VA rule. VA says if something comes up, you don't like where you live, you can switch out and move somewhere else. And so technically we've seen people use the VA loan twice in the same year because they bought a place, they didn't like it, but they could rent it because otherwise they would lose money. And then buy another property and also use their VA home loan.
And when they buy that second property, it kind of goes back to that second misconception of, well, you still have that entitlement. That's when the cap is enforced, right?
Right.
Question, the genuine question. Let's say my house is $1 million and I use my VA home loan for that. I hate it, whatever. I rent it out. What is my entitlement? Is it by area? What is it? Does $1 million have anything to do with it? Or is it, I have a $500,000 house. Is my entitlement more? What's the deal?
Good question on that. This is more of a technical question. So depending on that area, depending on the single family loan limit, it's going to change. Because in Arlington, Virginia, it's a much higher. I think it's $1,149,825. In another area, it's $766,550 currently, and next year it will be updated. So in one area, that example of he bought a place for $266,550. Well, hey, back in Illinois, you can only buy a place for $500,000. Well, you can buy a place for $500,000 with no money down. Mm-hmm. Now you transfer that to Arlington. Now it's the $1,149,825 minus the $266. I'm not that fast at math, and so then basically that would be your max entitlement, and anything over that would require a down payment. But that's also an important part when you're in the home buying process is to understand your finances and what those look like, because if you had to move out of your property, especially if you're active duty, would you be forced to sell? And if you're forced to sell, then that can do some undue hardship for you, because most of the time you're not going to have equity in your property overnight, right? Unless, I don't know how you would do that, right? Especially if you have to do 100% financing plus the VA funding fee. Unless you have a 10% or higher disability rating, then you don't pay that funding fee. That gets tacked onto the balance, right? So you have to be really careful with your finances around switching around. And the only exception to that, I'll kind of couple this with one other piece, is that the only time that you could buy a property and not live in it is if you're on active duty and your spouse can meet the occupancy requirement. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're stationed here in Arlington, Virginia, and you have to go to the Pentagon, let's say, right? But you have a spouse that has family in Madison, Wisconsin. Well, technically, since you're on active duty and your spouse will be moving to that location, you could still use your VA home loan and you use it as a primary residence, and you won't be living it. But it's the only time you can do that, right? So that's another nifty thing you can do.
Yeah, every time I hear someone talk about they're going to use a VA home loan, it's all what gets brought up every time are VA home loan inspections and buying the home as is. And to my understanding, which is nothing, by the way, I understand that VA home loan inspections or inspectors are more strict. Which, to be honest with you, I don't know why you would not want that to begin with, but that's above my head. So what's the misconception there?
So a couple things to that, as with all statements. So one, the VA doesn't require a home inspection, but they encourage you to get one. The second thing is the VA does their own inspection, which the inspection that they do is the appraisal, right? So they don't have like a home inspection, VA home inspection, right? It's basically part of the appraisal process. And what they're looking for is the minimum property requirements that the VA has set forth in its VA handbook, which anybody can go, type in VA handbook and it takes you to VA's website, 616 pages. You want to go through it? If you need a nap, go ahead. We have a lot of that memorized. So they're just making sure that the property is going to meet the VA's requirements. Plus, it's going to make sure that it's safe, sound, and sanitary. Okay. So one of the biggest complaints, both from the real estate community and from the lending or from the consumer community, is that when the appraiser goes back out or they go to the property, they're like, well, there's peeling paint, there's these and these issues, and sellers don't want to do those repairs. So it does cause some undue hardship for a veteran because some people are like, I don't care, I want to buy it, especially in a competitive market. So the VA came out not too long ago with basically saying like, look, veterans have the option to do an escrow holdback. Now, I'm not an attorney on this, but we have experience working with these. Is that let's say, actually best with an example. Let's say $1,000 worth of repairs are required per the VA because of some peeling paint. Okay. You as a veteran go out and get some bids and say, look, this costs $1,000. Lender typically is going to go, okay, we'll take those bids. They're not safety issues. We're going to do 150% holdback, meaning $1,500 when you get to closing. We're going to hold that money back. And then after you finish the repairs, which, by the way, you can do the repairs yourself or hire that company that you had contracted, appraiser goes back out, clears it, and then boom, you get your money back, right? So that was like a huge hurdle for the veteran community. Another one is that it has to be in perfect condition. Like I have to buy new construction. I can't afford it, but I'm handy and I want to buy a property that just needs a little TLC. And I did the same thing, right? And I have a bunch of buddies that, purchased their homes with VA home loans. And sometimes I looked at the houses. I'm like, bro, I don't think this is going to work. Even my own place, right? But they passed with flying colors because they were just outdated. That's it, right? And the second thing that happens with in the appraisal process is that if you have a dilapidated garage, barn, or shed, the VA is they're going to note that and say, well, this has to get fixed. Well, a workaround on that is you can submit a letter to the lender that submits it to the appraiser to say, I want to omit a structure so I can actually qualify for the property. And then they'll just write a letter like, I'm going to demo that anyways. Most of the time, it's not salvageable. Downside is if you remove it, then you take the value away from that. But if it's dilapidated and it brings no value, you should be pretty good to go in that sense. Yeah.
All right. And the last misconception I really want to talk about, and it goes back to veterans getting rich, which is a topic.
Building wealth.
Building wealth, yes, which is a topic that I want to know for myself. When it comes to purchasing a home with the VA home loan with the intent as an income property, how does that change like the regulations of using that VA home loan?
A couple things to this. Okay. So remember we talked about earlier about having multiple VA loans, right? So you can use it as an investment vehicle to be able to buy properties, occupy them, and then rent them out, right? And then do that. One thing I didn't mention is that the only time you could do a refinance on an investment property that has a VA loan on it is through an interest rate reduction refinance loan. So as the market's shifting, if rates are going down, you have a VA loan on an investment property that has a higher interest rate, you can still do the interest rate reduction refinance loan. So it's just kind of like a side bonus item on that. So you can purchase technically up to a 4-unit plus commercial space. I've never seen a commercial space piece executed, but you can buy a 4-unit property. So that allows you to live in 1 unit, rent out the other 3. And then when you move out of that property, you can rent out the 4th unit. The thing you have to be really careful with that is that you need to really understand rent, how much rent you're going to be getting, what the market rent is, because if you're buying at 100%, for example, veterans are the only ones that can do that, right? Otherwise, investors come in, they put 20, 25, 30, 40% down payments because they need to meet a certain payment or a certain payment and rent roll in order to justify the investment, right? Because again, it's another tool where someone else is paying your mortgage. The renters are paying your mortgage and they're paying it down for you. So you kind of get to step back and build that equity. So over the next 20 to 30 years, you can then own that, $1 million asset, for example, right? And that's what people always say too, is like, well, I don't want to pay a mortgage if you're renting. Well, guess what? If you're renting, you're paying someone's mortgage.
You're paying someone else's mortgage.
Yeah, and I had a call today with somebody, and they were fired up about it. They're like, I can't believe I've paid this person $260,000 over the last 10 years. I could have had the equity by on me, and then in 10 years ago it was much cheaper. And that's the overall piece of it too, Clay, is that a lot of people will put things off. Like, I'm waiting for the market to drop 30%. I'm waiting for rates to become 3%. The reality is that you'll never buy a house if that's where you go, right? The people that had homes prior to the market shifting down, they were already homeowners and they refinanced. They took benefits. That's why we always say, like, if you can afford it today, you can execute on it. Don't hold back. Reach out to someone like me. I can help you, right? And walk you through that process so it prepares you for home ownership. Because like these conceptions exist. We hear them on a daily because we do presentations all the time. And it just opens up opportunities, especially like if you're waiting on your disability, it comes through. Like, I've been on the phone with people and they like checking their app. Like, I don't know if I got my, and like, boom, I'm 100% PNT. And it's like, right. No property taxes, depending on the state you're in. Make sure you check all that out. But
yeah, I'm a huge fan personally of doing double payments on my mortgage, because I would much rather pay. You're essentially paying yourself for the long haul.
Right.
That's a whole other topic, though.
Yeah, it's a whole other.
A lot of people don't agree with paying down your mortgage faster. I'm a fan of truly being debt free. But that's all. That's your top 5 misconceptions. We're going to have links below down in the description. And just, David, how I always preach veterans for their disability compensation to understand the process as it pertains to them, and then use a VSO or an accreditation somehow, some way to help them submit. I think in this case, the same thing applies. My advice to any veteran who does not want to live paycheck to paycheck, who does not want to pay someone else's mortgage for the rest of your life, contact David, ask him questions. No contract out the gate. You can hit him up on use Calendly for meetings.
Yep.
They can ask you questions and then go ahead and build that relationship. And if you want to go forward with it, you have a subject matter expert here. Last words, the camera's all yours. What do you have to say?
Just don't disqualify yourself. Reach out to a professional. Remember one thing too, the VA doesn't set rates or fees, because a lot of people are thinking that, oh, that's what this lender is saying. So shop around a little bit. You'll be surprised at how much money you can save. So thank you, Clay, again.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, dude.